Welcome to our session on functions. Let us continue the discussion on parameters. In the last session we have discussed about actual and formal parameters. Just a recap. Actual parameters are the parameters which are there in functions call, and formal parameters are the parameters which appear in functions header. So here this example we have seen n1 and n2, these are in the function call statement, these are the actual parameters, and a and b which are in the function header, they are the formal parameters. Now let us see what are the different types of formal parameters. As we know, Python matches parameters by their number and position. So we have to specify the exact number of arguments that are there in functions header or functions definition. So that means we can call a function by passing the required number of arguments. Now this process may be somewhat changed. This procedure of passing arguments may be somewhat changed. Like sometimes we may skip some values, or we may change the order, but for that we have to use specific type of parameters. We have to pass specific type of parameters. So in Python, parameters may be of three types: positional, default, and keyword. Let us now see what are positional, default, and keyword arguments. Positional parameters are those parameters whose values must be passed. They are mandatory, and their values need to be passed in the order in which they appear in the function's header. That means in the function call, values that we will be providing, they should be according to the parameters that are there in the function's header or definition. Now default parameters means we may assign some default value to the parameters in the function definition. If we are doing so, then the value of that parameter becomes optional in the function call, and we may or may not pass value for it. We will see default arguments in detail just a while after. Now default parameters provide the flexibility of calling the function in different ways. We'll see with example how default arguments provides flexibility of calling a function in different ways. And the third one is named arguments or keyword arguments. If we are using names in the function call as well, which is same as that in the function header, then that provides us flexibility of calling the function by calling it or passing the parameters in any order. They need not be fixed as in case of positional parameters. So let us start with positional parameters or positional arguments. They are also known as required or mandatory arguments, as their values need to be passed in a function's call. So this is the case when we are not having any default or keyword parameters. So we have an example of simple interest here. Let us write the program for that. We'll start with the function's definition. To calculate the simple interest, we need the principal rate and time. So a function definition start with the def keyword followed by the name. So I'm giving the name simple interest, and let us name it as principal rate and time. Now here principal rate and time, these are the formal parameters, followed by the colon, and now we will calculate simple interest. as principal into, start with the parenthesis, principal multiplied by rate multiplied by time divided by 100. So this is our simple interest. We are not going to return any value here. Simply I will print. It depends upon how we are programming, what we actually need, whether we want the result or it may not be returned. So here we are not returning the value, rather we are printing principal amount is print. Then knowingly I have kept some few lines in the function's definition, because in the last program we have seen only one function, one statement in the function body, which was only a return statement. So to show that it depends on us how we are writing the program. So we are now starting the main part, where we will have the input for principal, rate and time. So principal input float integer. Let us take all integers. Integer input principal just to differentiate between input and print statement. So similarly we'll input and one more input for rate and for time. So input, enter rate and time. Now as it is not returning any value, we will simply call the function simple interest. Simple int is the name, and we will pass p. Then as the order of parameters is principal, rate and time, whatever we pass, whether we pass PRT or PTR or RPT, the first value will be taken for principal, the second value for rate, and this will not know if we pass time in place of principal, because it will simply, this is the example of positional arguments, and this will simply consider the first argument for principal, second value passed for rate, and third value passed for time. So let us first pass the values in order, and then we will see what happens if we change the order. We will try to change the order. So save the program, run it. Let me write it the purpose, positional parameters and others. So again save and run. Remember, comments are the non-executable statements. So let me enter principal as 1000 and rate as 10% and time as 5 years. So the simple interest is 500. Now we have called the function by passing PRT. So P will be passed to principal, R will be passed to rate, and T will be passed to time. But if we change the order here, suppose T, R, T, P and R, what will happen? You see, file save, run, enter principal 1000, same value I am repeating, 10 and 5 as yes, but now it shows principal amount as 5. They tell us that the order should be retained if we want to mean what we actually passed. So again I am going back and changing it to order. So it won't understand that I mean T as principal and T as time, rate as R as rate and T as time. So we have to retain the order, we have to pass the arguments in order in which they appear in the function's header. This is all regarding positional arguments. That is what we have tried to explain. Next, let us discuss about default arguments or default parameters. Default values, they are useful when we try to match argument without actually specifying all the parameters. For example, in the previous example, in simple interest, we require 3 parameters: principal, rate and time. But we know time may be different for different persons, principal may be different for different persons. However, rate of interest will be fixed. So if we want rate to be fixed, then we may simply call the function by passing the two values principal and time, where rate will be used in calculation, but that will take the default value. Sometimes it may so happen that rate of interest has changed. So if we are passing the value for rate, then the past value will be used, and if we are not passing, then the default value will be used. So this is how default arguments help us in skipping the parameters for which default values is already assigned. So we may call a function by passing different number of parameters, but however we cannot change the order of the arguments. And one more thing we have to keep in mind, that the default parameters should be on the right side. That means any non-default parameter cannot be there to the right of any default parameters. We will see by example. And another important thing we have to note is positional or required parameters, they have to appear before the default arguments. Okay, again let us see the same example of simple interest, live example. And as we have discussed, let us change this program to have a default value for rate. Now as discussed, the default parameters should be to the right of all the non-default parameters, or any non-default parameter cannot appear to the right side of a default parameter. So let us fix it, provide a default value for it as 8. Now when we run this program, we have the flexibility of calling the function in two ways. One is by providing the value for rate, and another is by skipping the value for rate. So we may simply call simple interest again without passing the value for rate. So I have to keep the rate to the rightmost of the parameter list. And now let us execute the program again. Save the file. I have called simple interest in two ways. First by passing the rate, and second without passing the rate. Let us now execute this program. Enter principal. I am giving the same value again, 1000 and rate is 10 and time is 5. So just have a look. Now it has given us simple interest twice. The first time with the default value, with the rate of interest that we have passed, that is 10, and second time with the rate of interest 8, in which case we have actually not passed the value for rate. See the example here. This first time the interest calculation is with the value of rate that we have provided here, and the second time calculation interest rate of interest with default value of rate 8. Now what if we try to change the order? What if we try to keep the non-default value to the right of a default parameter? Now let us save it and try to execute. So it will simply display the error non-default parameter argument follows default parameter. It will not allow to run the program. So if we are having default parameters, then we have to keep in mind that they must be on the right hand side. So we'll discuss about keyword parameters. Keyword parameters or arguments, they are the parameters which have name in the function call statement, or they are the named arguments and which has a syntax of syntax like a dictionary, that is a key which is assigned a value and in the function call statement, and this provides the flexibility of calling the argument in different order. This is referred to as keyword arguments required in Python documentation. So here in this example, the same example, simple interest, where we have used, see the function call statement we have used. Okay, so again let us have this example of simple interest and let us have keyword arguments. So this time, instead of having the default value, this is example for keyword parameters or named parameters, rather named parameters. Now here what I will do, I will use the same name print as in function header, print equal to p, just as we do in dictionary. This is the key, print is the key, that is the name, and p is the value. Similarly, time equals to t and rate equals to r. See the function call statement and the function header. This is the function header and this is the function's call. Now try to observe the order of appearance of parameters. I have kept principal, then time, then rate, whereas here rate appears before time. If it had been positional parameters, that means we did not have any name in the function call, then it will take error. That means it will take rate in place of time and time in place of rate. But here it will work fine. Though we have changed the order of rate and time, the correct value will be taken by time, will be taken, t will be taken by time, and r will be taken by rate, because we have specified that we are assigning r to rate and t to time, whatever may be the order in the function header. Now save it and run again. So let us enter the principal. Begin as 1000, rate as 10, time as 5. And now see, it has taken time as time and rate of interest as rate, though we have changed the order of time and rate in function call, it does not match the order of time and rate in function header. So this is how keyword arguments provides the flexibility of changing the order of arguments or having change in order of arguments. So all these arguments may be combinedly used in a function header, but we will discuss that in the next class.